Hello everyone, my name is Ty Everett, the founding president of Project Babbage, and welcome to the third Babbage tutorial. At the end of the last tutorial, you had an app that you could use to post messages and see them on a public message board using the Hello World protocol and the Hello World protocol bridge on Bridgeport. The last tutorial was about using action protocols, taking actions in a Babbage app, and then seeing the results of those actions as it was transformed by a Bridgeport overlay network on top of Bitcoin. And then allowing that to represent itself as changes in your user interface so that when you take an action, you have some effect of taking that action. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about the actual creation of an action protocol. So last time we were using action protocols. This time we are creating action protocols. So in order to create an action protocol, we need to create a Bridgeport bridge that defines a way by which transactions in Bitcoin have certain meanings. So in the last tutorial, in fact, I'll pull up the code. In the last tutorial, what we had here is a repository I have on the top left here. I'm going to zoom up to it. This here is the code from the last tutorial, tutorial number 2. And what I've done here is I've created a project in Visual Studio, and I've put the code here in one of the folders. I'm going to rename this. What we're going to be doing in this third tutorial is we're going to be allowing the person who is posting a message using our little global message board to set a custom name for themselves so that when they post a message, it comes up under the name which they've set. So it'll allow a person to have a little nickname instead of just using that long address which they had set up before. I'm going to rename this to Postboard, and the Postboard UI is going to be the example that we're going to be creating in tutorial number 3. So the original code, and you can see this is the same code as we saw for tutorial number 2, is now in a folder inside the tutorial number 3. And that folder is going to be renamed. So I'm just going to rename this to Postboard UI. So what we have here is Postboard UI as the name of our new user interface code base. I'm going to change directories into Postboard UI, and then I'm going to install the dependencies that we installed last time. If we take a look at this code in the Postboard UI, which is the new name for the existing code that we had before we change it, we go to app.js. We can see we're using Parapet. And we're talking to this bridge, right? The Hello World Protocol bridge. And we're using the Hello World Protocol bridge to ask, we're telling it, find the things that happened using the Hello World Protocol. So if I go, I think it's here, and I say start, I'll be able to pull up the browser. And if I launch my Babbage desktop, which I don't know if it's running at the moment, it might be. As you know from last time, we'll be able to see all of the HWP Hello World Protocol messages. So I'm just going to launch my Babbage desktop. So there that is, and I'll open up my my console there, and you can see here's all of the HWP messages, right? So it looks like there were some people that followed the Babbage tutorial since I created it that have different addresses than I do. So we've got Bob here, and so following the HWP tutorial will get you this app with this interface. In that tutorial, I just gave you an instruction. I said, well, go ahead and use this particular bridge. Use the HWP bridge to obtain, you create transactions that follow the HWP protocol, the one that I created, and then they show up on the HWP bridge, which I created. So if I go to bridgeport.babbage.systems and I scroll down, actually it's right on the top here, Hello World Protocol. I click into this, and what I can see is, here's the Hello World Protocol. This is all it means to follow the Hello World Protocol. So if you go to the Bridgeport page, you can read through this, and I created this protocol. This is an action protocol that I created. But in this tutorial, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to show you how you can create an action protocol. So instead of just using ones that I created, like we're doing with tutorial 2, now we're going to be creating an app where you have more freedom. Because if all you ever do is use other people's action protocols, you can do things like build a version of Convo Messenger that uses the Convo bridge, even though you didn't create the Convo bridge. Because that information, you can query it using Parapet. You can read from bridges that already exist. But if you want to be truly free to model Bitcoin and to take data and transform it in a way that you define, to ascribe meaning to transactions in a way that you think is important, then what you need to do is learn how to create Bridgeport bridges that filter out the transactions that you want, transform those transactions into a data set that makes sense for your use case, and then read those transactions into your applications, rendering them into a UI, and transforming them into a good user experience. Then what you can do with Babbage Desktop and the create action function, as we're doing, I believe, just a little bit lower down here, we're using the create action function here on line 84 to send a Bitcoin transaction that complies with the particular rules of the particular bridge which you've created. Now, if all you're ever doing is using other people's Bridgeport bridges, then you always have to create transactions that follow their rules. Otherwise, those transactions will not show up in their Bridgeport bridges, and therefore, when you try to query them inside of your application, you will not see them because you didn't follow their rules. So how do you make your own rules? If I got rid of this X here on 89, suddenly this is no longer a valid HWP message. So if I wanted to define maybe a different message format, or if I wanted to allow people to have displayed screen names on this message platform, which is what we're going to be doing in our custom bridge here, I would not be able to do that because I would be restricted to only creating messages, only creating transactions that comply with the rules of existing bridges. So what we're going to be doing involves more than one repository. We have our user interface, which I renamed to, what did I rename it to? The postboard UI. And that postboard UI is a user interface that's going to leverage a new bridge. So there's also going to be the postboard bridge, and we'll get there in just a second. So instead of using the Hello World bridge, what you're going to do when you follow this tutorial is you're going to be creating a new repository for a new bridge and model the data in the way that you want to model it. So you're going to be the creator of the Bridgeport bridge, and so you're going to be the one that runs that sets the rules for your protocol. So I encourage you to experiment. I encourage you to create protocols that are different and distinct from the one that I'm creating here. But what I want you to do is make inferences and look at the tools and the techniques that I'm using to create this protocol. And maybe don't create the exact same one. I mean, an example I would give is if I go on YouTube and I look up a video, how do I create a chair out of wood or something random like that? maybe I see the person, creating this chair, and maybe that's their design. But if I still want to be creative, maybe when I go and do mine, I adapt it a little bit. I change it. I make some modifications because I don't necessarily want to, copy the exact design and have mine look exactly the same. But I can still infer based on the techniques that the person making the video has used, what might be a good idea, what might not, and those sorts of things. So that's the context in which I'm showing you how to create a protocol, because a protocol is an understanding between people about a topic. For example, the Hello World protocol is a method by which we understand that there is a certain meaning associated with a set of Bitcoin transactions that are formatted in a particular way. Bitcoin itself is a protocol, an understanding between the people involved about how the system should operate. And when I create a protocol, when I show you how to create a protocol, I've already defined the protocol specifically that I am creating. So what I don't want you to do is create the same protocol that I've created, because it's already defined. I mean, if you use the same exact rules that I use, then we're always going to be viewing Bitcoin in the same way. So Bridgeport bridges, such as the Hello World bridge that we're looking at here with Parapet when we make our query, are just a way of viewing Bitcoin in a specific way. So my protocol is going to define certain rules and constraints by which my application views Bitcoin. But this is where we diverge in our tutorial. My application is not going to behave exactly as your application might behave, because depending on the things that you do with your application, you might be now viewing Bitcoin in a different way than I'm viewing Bitcoin. There might be certain data structures or certain transaction formats or certain ways of putting things in that make more sense for your use case than it does for mine. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and create what I think is a good Bridgeport bridge for this post-board application that allows not only the sending of messages, same like the Hello World bridge, but also the setting of a user's nickname. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new repository on GitHub, but let me just go through some of the Bridgeport documentation first, so that way I think people can better understand it. I'm going to start on bridgeport.babbage.systems here. There will be a link to this in the video description. In fact, actually, this is one place, and there's also on my website, I have some other things. But actually, yeah, I'm just going to start here. I think this is a good place to start. Here we can see a list of all the Bridgeport bridges that people have created in the past. The way of viewing Bitcoin in terms of the Hello World protocol. The way of viewing Bitcoin in terms of the user management protocol, which is how Babbage Desktop manages its users internally, etc. All of these bridges are things that people have created. Now, if you create a Bridgeport bridge with the same name as me, then when I pull up this list after making this tutorial, there's going to be like 10 bridges that are all called the same thing. And if they don't all do the same thing, that's kind of unfortunate. I mean, that's kind of, I encourage you to come up with a unique name for your bridge, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. Like I'm going to call mine Ty's Postboard Bridge, Ty's Postboard Bridge. And I encourage you to, whatever your application is, whatever you want to try to make, look at how I'm doing this and read the documentation for Bridgeport, and then come to an understanding about the kinds of data you want to store, the methods by which you want to store it, and a good name for your application's bridge when you set things up. So there's this big blue cut button at the top, call to action, and it's open the Bridgeport dashboard. So when I open the Bridgeport dashboard, it's going to look a little different. So it's going to look like this, but now it's loaded all of my stuff in, right? So if you haven't created a bridge yet, it would be loading, and it would be, you wouldn't see this big list. These are all the bridges that I've created. But I'm going to make a new bridge for this particular thing. So you can, again, read the documentation. If you go here, you'll see this is a repository containing lots of very useful information. I encourage you to read all of the documents in this repository after you watch this video, before you go and make your bridge, because you need to have an understanding about what is a bridge filter, what is a bridge transformer, what is a bridge reader, and how do they work together to parse Bitcoin and to view Bitcoin and present Bitcoin in a way that makes the most sense for your application. So give these documents a read in this repository. I encourage you to kind of follow the flow of this README. It links to all the documents in a good order. And I would also encourage you to check out some examples. So after you read the documents, you should be able to look up the Hello World Protocol bridge. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because it's the same bridge that we're using in Babbage tutorial number 2. We're making a query against the Hello World Protocol bridge. So this is an example bridge. In fact, this is the starter bridge. If you make a new bridge and don't, if you're just going to fork this template, which I'm going to be doing here for my bridge, then it's going to look like this. It's going to be this kind of starter. So there's a transformer, there's a reader, and there is a filter. There's a Bridgeport.json file, which contains the bridge filter right here. And it also contains where is the transformer and what runtime, and where's the reader and what runtime, and the repo token as we instruct, and also the bridge ID. And you'll notice that the bridge ID is this address. It starts with 1PRQ8. And if I go over here to Parapet, and I see what bridge I'm talking to, line 15, 1PRQ8. It's the same address. So every bridge has a bridge ID, and that bridge ID is how Parapet and other tools reference that bridge and can make queries against that particular bridge without needing to know a specific server or a specific website that hosts that particular bridge. So my Bridgeport node runs on a certain website on the internet called bridgeport.babbage.systems. But if some other Bridgeport bridge comes up and hosts the same bridge, claims to host the same bridge ID, and if you trust them, you can make a query against their bridge and my bridge. Their version and my version, both. And because they're both using the same protocol, because they're both filtering and parsing transactions in the same way, it may not necessarily matter which of the Bridgeport nodes you're using to query, which means that we have distributed availability of data, distributed availability of the methods by which Bitcoin can be viewed through these bridges in various lenses and lights for different applications and different use cases. So it's kind of robust for that reason. That's how Parapet doesn't require a single server. When I make a query using Parapet against a bridge, there are resolvers that resolve which servers to use based on the bridge ID. So bridge ID is what goes in Parapet when you want to make a query against a bridge. And I also made another slight change. I actually just wrote a commit on the tutorial number 2 repository because I think this is important. The change I made is that when you create an action, you can tag that action with the specific bridges that are pertinent to that action. And that will help the Bridgeport nodes that host those particular bridges to be aware of the transactions that you make that are destined for those bridges more quickly. So it's basically just a shorthand way of letting Bridgeport know, like, these transactions should go to this bridge. So let's let everybody who hosts this bridge know about those transactions. The Bridgeport bridge should still work if you don't tag your actions with the transaction or with the bridge IDs. But actions that you take, for example, I take an action here that follows the Hello World protocol. I'm going to let the Hello World bridge and its bridge ID know that this transaction follows the Hello World protocol, and that way the Hello World bridge stays updated. It just helps it stay updated more quickly. So, with that out of the way, now we're looking at a piece of code related to a Bridgeport bridge, and it's in this repository. I am now on the Bridgeport dashboard, and I'm going to create a new bridge. The first thing is, step 1, create a repo. Okay. Fork the template Hello World Protocol GitHub repo and provide the link to your fork. Note, you can make your fork private if you don't want your bridge's source code to be public. So, I've got the Hello World Protocol bridge here, and it's linked here. So you can just click on this link and it'll take you to the same place I am here. And I'm just going to fork this on GitHub. If I can find the right button for that. I think it's on the top right. Okay, I think I did it properly. I just messed up my GitHub repository stuff for a second, but that shouldn't really apply to you because you should just be able to fork the repo and pull it down. And you won't have any of these problems. So, we've got Ty's postboard bridge created here. And just gonna make a, so once you make a git push setup stream origin master, once you make a repo, once you fork it, and once it's live on GitHub like this here, all you need to do is copy the link. So you shouldn't really have to do most of that. You should just be able to go fork it like I was trying to. Put the link here, and then you're going to want to install the GitHub app. So install Bridgeport app. Install the Bridgeport deployments app into your GitHub repo. Come back to this site after installation and click next. So I'm going to click here, and it's going to take me to this. Now, I've already installed, right? So it says configure. I've already installed this, but you can click into your GitHub account, or you can click into specifically into your bridge repo. So if you're going to have multiple bridges, you may want to install it for your GitHub user so that it deploys on every user that you on every bridge repository that you create. But in my case, I already have it installed, so I'm just going to close this out. But you can install that and just point it at the repository that you've created, and you go next. And the next step is to set the bridge ID. So a bridge ID is a unique Bitcoin address used to identify your bridge. You can generate a new bridge ID now, or paste it if you already have a key you want to use. So as we talked about with the Hello World protocol, right? This is the bridge ID. This is not the bridge ID. This is just a tag inside the Bitcoin transaction. But up here, this is the bridge ID in Parapet, as well as this here. Those are the bridge ID. So I'm going to generate a new bridge ID for the for Ty's postboard bridge. So generate a bridge ID. Your new bridge ID will be generated, and the private key will be downloaded to your computer. The key will never be sent to our servers. It is important to save your key because we cannot get it back for you. So when you generate a bridge ID, you are the person who made that bridge. You are the one who defines the protocol associated with that bridge. You are the one who sets the rules for that protocol. And I am the holder of the key associated with this bridge ID because I defined the Hello World protocol. And in fact, if I go to bridgeport.babbage.systems, we can see the bridge ID right below the name. So Hello World Protocol is this bridge ID. And that's the correct version as well. So, generating a new bridge ID for Ty's postboard bridge. And we can see on the bottom here, it has downloaded the private bridge ID key for this new address. And that 1F is going to be important. 1F C6H. That is the new address associated with this bridge. Next, we're sending some requests over to the servers, and now we need a sign. So, authorized bridge hosting. You just created a Bridgeport bridge, and you're the only one with that private key that hosts it. But I, as the Bridgeport node operator who's wanting to host your bridge, want to make sure it's okay with you. So, give us permission to host your bridge on our servers by signing a message with your bridge ID private key. So I, the owner of the Bridgeport bridge with this bridge address, hereby authorize bridgeport.babbage.systems, so my Bridgeport node, to host the bridge based on the contents of the source repository at the link for the repo you provided, as long as that repository contains this repo token here. Now, we just signed that. If you don't want to generate your private key here, you could have pasted it in and then pasted in a signature and done it that way. Now, it's telling us to go update our bridgeport.json. So, deploy your new bridge. Update the bridgeport.json file in your new bridge repository with the fields below. Then, push your changes to the master branch to trigger your first deployment. What we're going to do is close out of that. We're going to go to Ty's postboard bridge under bridgeport.json, and we're going to update the values. So, bridge ID, new bridge ID that we just generated. No longer are we using the hello world bridge ID because this is our new bridge now, right? A name needs to be a human readable bridge name. The description needs to be a one-line description, and the repo token is important because that's what allows Bridgeport to know that that repo that you provided a link to is actually, authorized. So we'll put the repo token, and it doesn't matter that you know the repo token in this video. I'm not going to redact it. And the reason why, the only thing I would redact is that private key that I generated, but I didn't even show that on the screen because it just downloaded it to my computer. The reason why it's okay is because while you may have the repo token, you don't have control over the repo. So I have to approve any merges into this repo, and when they get merged, then they get deployed to Bridgeport. So if you made a new repo and tried to use my same repo token, you would have to generate a new repo token in order for my Bridgeport node to accept your bridges. So that's kind of how that works. All right. Bridgeport 0.2. Fine. ID. Name. All right. Here's where we're going to set the bridge name. And this is where you should put your name or you should put something unique. I'm going to say Ty's postboard bridge. And I'm going to change the description. Sorry for panning around so much during this part. I'm going to actually zoom out a little bit. And here I'm going to say post messages and set a screen name on a public message board. Post messages and set a screen name on a public board. On a public, how about post board? On a public post board. The version is 1.0. There's the repo token. This is all correct. Now, we're basically just setting the directory for the transformer and the reader here. And the reader is pretty well set up usually. I haven't really had to make many changes to the bridge readers because they're just opening up access to the database. But starting block height. we're making a new protocol on top of Bitcoin. What I'm going to do to, and this is one way you can differentiate your bridge from mine, I'm going to go in what's on chain, and I see the current block height is 715,925. So every transaction after that block height can be part of this bridge. So I'm basically saying that categorically I do not care about any transaction that happened before that block height. And the next thing, and if you've done anything with like BitBus, you'll recognize this. This is just a way of filtering out Bitcoin transactions that comply with a certain rule. In this case, we're saying this filter, if I were to translate this from a language called BitQuery into a language called English, it basically says, I only care about transactions where the first output is op false, op return, and then this string here, which in our case was that hello world string. Because remember, in the hello world protocol, what did it mean to follow the hello world protocol? Well, that's in the documentation, but if we look at the UI, which we haven't updated yet, so we're still using the old UI, the first data element inside of the action that we took needed to contain this string, right? This bitcom identifier for the hello world protocol. And then there was a sender ID and the post text. So what I'm going to do here, in my particular case, in hello world, we had two different things. We had two different strings of text. We had the bridge ID and then we had the protocol ID, and those were separate, right? So the hello world bridge had a certain bridge ID, and then there was the hello world tag, which was used inside the transactions, and that was different. But what I think is going to be simpler is if I just use this bridge ID. So I just generated a new bridge ID, and because I'm not using anything existing, I'm just going to use that as my tag. So now I've got myself a bridge ID that also acts as a namespace for transactions that comply with this bridge. And you can do that if you want. You can do anything you want inside your filter, but this is what I'm going to do. And this basically means that every transaction that this bridge cares about has to have that field op false, op return, and then there's that field for the bridge, for the identifier. And that's the same as the bridge ID in our particular case. And that's actually everything for the bridge, for the Bridgeport.json. So we set up our bridge filter. So we've defined what Bitcoin transactions we care about, right? If I go to the Bridgeport docs, and I'll pull this up here, that's like one of the steps. I'm closing out of what's on chain. I'm going to leave this open because when we commit first, it's saying we got to make a commit to master before we, so we could actually just see this, right? I just hit finished and we see there's no deployments. So I'll have to refresh this page and I'm just going to close out of this as well. I'll have to refresh the page after I commit to master on this repository when the deployment shows up. But point is, I go to the Bridgeport docs and we have already completed the first step. Bridgeport docs. 1, you write a filter. I'll zoom in on this. 1, you write a filter that determines what kinds of Bitcoin transactions your bridge wants to know about. This is called a bridge filter. If you do not provide a bridge filter, the default filter allows all Bitcoin transactions into your bridge transformer, all the way from the Genesis block to present. So this guy basically says, don't give me every single transaction from the Genesis block all the way to present, because I don't care. I only care about transactions that happened after this certain block height and where it passes this certain test. In the future, there will be better ways of writing more advanced tests inside of bridge filters, such as must have a UTXO that has an ancestor of a certain thing for like tracking chains of transactions, etc. But These are early days.